First and foremost, my hats off to Kellen and Ian and everybody for being a part of this and putting this on. My name is Brett Samus. I have 20-ish, is the word, some odd years of a variety of IT and intelligence background. Today we'll talk a little bit about open source intelligence. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but we'll sort of touch it all, and at the same time give you all a couple key takeaways, some fun stuff to try at home. Much like everybody else has done, I have to give the disclaimer, since like a few of us, I'm associated with the U.S. government in the interest of full disclosure. So I am not speaking for, oh shoot, went too far. Let's try that again. There it is. I am not speaking for the U.S. government, for NATO, where I currently work, the United States Army, Department of Defense, any of that. And on top of that, I am not a lawyer or affiliated with any law firm. So any advice you hear when the time comes in your trial, this slide right here is Exhibit A for the defense, in terms of me saying that I had nothing to do with whatever trouble you got yourself into. To get that shared mental model, let's, at least for my purposes, like I said, OSINT means different things to different people. But for our purposes, OSINT is intelligence or refined information that's derived from publicly available information, from unclassified or out on the open web sources. The key phrase there is that systematic collection, processing, and exploitation. And by processing and exploitation, we mean pretty much analysis, thinking critically about it, of open sources. Those publicly available information can mean a lot of different things, but the biggest phrase right there is down in the middle, accessible online. And to be specific, accessible online without necessarily entering in any credentials, social media aside. So we're staying clear of the pen testing, the hacking, anything like that, where you're putting in somebody else's credentials, trying to elevate privileges, things like that. So OSINT is nothing new, but in the last 15 to 20 years, it has become increasingly powerful. And this is sort of an obligatory side that you see in a lot of places with the growth of the internet and ARPANET to DARPANET in general, both users they're highlighted and the percentage of the world population. I think most of us have seen the different internet minute and the terabytes and exabytes and petabytes of information that's being generated every day by any number of different things. And the ubiquity of that information has made OSINT increasingly powerful. OSINT, especially from the military and governmental perspective, goes back decades and hundreds of years, where we've been reading other nations' newspapers and trying to glean important information from that, going back, so the OSS in World War II was doing that. And of course, for our European friends, doing the same thing, back and forth, reading our papers, seeing what they can find out from easily accessible information. But that internet growth has made that information far more accessible and at far greater speed. So why OSINT? In this case, you see here at they're populated is Gary Alford, who was, I guess it was given some credit for running down Dread Pirate Roberts, or Ross Ulbricht, and the originator of the Silk Road a few years back, using, according to a couple different articles, nothing but open source intelligence and determination, sitting on his couch and digging through old message boards and finding where Ross slipped up and used his real name, asking for questions that tied him to the Silk Road. And that, while it ignores the fact that our man Gary there was a trained analyst for the government, but at the same time he was still sitting at home and doing his darndest to get after it, using the techniques that we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. Another good popular one is the MA17 downing there, and not making any presumptions either way, but Bell & Cat, a very fairly well-known firm, and feel free to plug them into your preferred search engine, did a pretty exhaustive search on the MA17 downing using social media and open source in general to tie specific people to the potential downing of the MA17. Why else Osen? Because it's fun. You can do it from home, like our man Gary did here. We've heard lots of great stuff from the presenters on pen testing, both web app and general red team. However, you can't just sit on your couch for the most part and plug in your close quote, semicolon, drop tables into whatever particular SQL backbone that you want without getting yourself in trouble or violating a number of national or international laws. The same goes for pen testing, but OSINT, a lot of the underlying skills you can sit there and just get after without getting yourself into all kinds of trouble. But we'll refer back to slide 2 when you decide to go poking around. And not to say that there's not potential for that. There's plenty of labs you can set up on the red team side, but this one you can browse around. So if it's supposedly so easy, I guess a question that OSINT analysts get asked a lot is why can't we just Google it? And unfortunately, it's not that simple. Our model here, think of her either as the exasperated OSINT analyst, or if you prefer, as the irritated boss. Either one, however you prefer to think of it. But the question you get asked all the time is, why not just Google it? It's straightforward enough. I see it. I can see it on CNN. I can see it wherever. Let's just Google it. And then the follow-up question to that, and again, this can be the face of either the OSINT analyst or the irritated boss, is, well, if you won't just Google it when you try to explain it, then I'll find someone who will. And let it populate. There we go. There's a few key questions that we ask as OSINT analysts that help us focus our search. What is the question we want to answer? Who is my customer? And then what is the desired end state? At the end of the day, it's tied closely to and similar to the data science questions that we have. If you don't have a really clear end state in mind, then you can wander forever in the vast expanse that is the internet and the compendium of all human knowledge at this point. So when we get asked the question about why can't we just Google it, there's a litany of issues that we have to consider. There we go, there it populated. So when we get to that, or when we get ask the question about why haven't you just Googled it, this wall of text that you have here is just a few things to think about in terms of OSINT. And much like InfoSec and the information security domain in general, there's any number of different areas that you can specialize in, and there's special skill sets that you can dive into in the OSINT world as well. Now, we'll touch on a few of them in a little bit more detail, but this is, frankly, it could be an example, and is an example of an OSINT course, and these courses taught by a couple different governments, and we'll touch on a few of the private organizations that teach them as well at the end, and I'll point you in the right direction. Can last weeks, up to I think the longest I've seen is a month to a month and a half. Starting in the top left, for search engines, when you think about it, of course, we all have Google, and we know that, and Yahoo's fallen by the wayside. But there's a couple others to consider, and we'll look at and we'll talk about Baidu and Yandex and a few others. But there are pros and cons to each of the different search engines. They are for-profit organizations, and they consider you a customer, and they are giving you what they think you want to know. Social networks, like I said, it's good luck changing constantly. I am of the Yahoo generation, so all of this, the TikToks and the up and coming different networks are all new to me and changing constantly. We'll touch briefly on covert accounts that gets into a tough gray area for information security, and the list goes on and on, from how to deal with the photos, digital images, videos, things like that. Deleted data, I'll mention the archive.org and trying to get into that. Legal considerations, both governmental and for private organizations, and the different applications that you can use, people searches, and so on. And we'll hit a few of those, but the general idea is it's not as simple as just Googling it. And then the big thing down there at the bottom right is staying current on all of this. It is very much a moving river where you are faced with completely new environments. There was a stretch back in 2018, 2019, where I took a few months off from what I was doing and came back after what is described as the great Facebook apocalypse, where Facebook cranked down on exactly what you could see and couldn't see in some of their different search engines, and completely turned upside down a lot of the research you could do in that environment. So it's taking its time. There we go. So yeah, the first one I mentioned, everybody knows, of course, Google has become the synonymous with searching, but the crawlers, the robots that search the indexes are different for each one. And there are, depending on where you're looking, different focus areas, different areas of interest, and different potential benefits for Google. Highlighted on the screen there are a couple others. Yandex and Baidu for the Far East both have their own different search operators and benefits. And Bing, everybody's down on Bing, still one of the, at least it's a fight for second at this place behind Google. But all of them, depending on what you're looking for, you benefit by touching them all. Of course, missing a few, DuckDuckGo, things like that, we could also touch on as well. But it's a whole specialty unto itself, it feels like. Regarding social media, I will defer to and let you check out Conversation Prism. There it comes up. Conversation Prism is a great amalgamation of all the different social media platforms you have, and really this just highlights all the different platforms you have. And when you draw attention to it, of course, you have the Facebooks and things like that, but at the same time, you have a wide spectrum to choose from, depending on what you're looking at and where you're looking, what your target is to start. And until you have that problem set up, then it's a tough nut to crack. And then of course you get into the accounts that are required for that. But until you know what you're looking for, then you don't even know where to start. And then the next, there it goes. The next one, the dreaded fine print, the legalese, depending on what you're doing. When you click around, when you go to your Washington Post, your CNNs, your the BBCs, any of those, when you browse there as an individual, then you have a good deal of leeway in terms of what you can do and saving those things. But when you start using those for analytical purposes, for building packets on whoever or whatever it is, then there is a good deal of copyright considerations. Bolded there at the bottom in the red. In this case, if you're using it for personal purposes, then you can make use of that for your own personal use to make machine readable copies and so on. But when you start plugging those into presentations that you're giving, then there are the reprints and permissions considerations that you have, because at the end of the day, all of these are for-profit institutions that have those restrictions in place. So depending on what your organization is, what your purposes are, there's a good deal to think about in that regard. And next, one of the most controversial parts, of course, sock puppets, false personas, aliases, however you prefer to think about it. When you get into the world of social media, at this point in time, I think Twitter being something of an exception, but for the most part, if you want to move around in the social media spaces, then you have to have an account. And you can, of course, most of us have, depending on our preferred social media platform or accounts. If you are poking around for open source purposes, for research purposes, for against or towards organizations, people that you don't necessarily want to know you're looking at, then it's required for the most part to have some kind of false persona. But of course, then you have to weigh that against the fact that that you are violating terms of service when you are not giving accurate information. I want to give credit to Michael Hoffman, who in one of his talks on Osen essentially said, yeah, you're not supposed to lie, but yes, you end up having to lie. So in the case of, and to clarify for NATO and how we go about business, our approach is to steer clear of the OSINT or the social media, spaces, because we, per our statutes and our regulations, don't create false personas or aliases at all. For private organizations and certainly for private individuals, that is a risk analysis that you have to sort of do on your own. You're of course not going to go to jail for it, but there are challenges with that and risk analysis that you have to do. Next, there we go. Another one to highlight that was on our long list, it was digital hygiene. There's a lot more to it. The just Googling it, depending on what you're looking at, especially if you're looking at individuals and very specific targets, then there's a lot that goes into what an organization and what the webmasters can see. If, as an analyst, in this case, you are looking at a very specific website, say a guy's blog who is only sharing it, only really intending an audience to be 5 or 10 people, then when you show up on his webpage as the webmaster, he sees hits that essentially don't look or resonate with him or make sense to what he is used to. So if he's used to 5, 10 hits a day, and all of a sudden he gets 20, 30, 100 hits from an organization in the Washington, D.C. area, he probably knows something's up. And at the same time, the circle there, right there, refers to the HTTP refer. When you punch in your search term, if you click directly from Google to that particular website, when you go there, the HTTP refer shows up and shows exactly what your search terms are, and you can, in many cases, give away what exactly you know about that to the webmaster of that website. And I want to give a shout out to Russ Hinault. He's down there at the bottom in navigators.com. Does a lot of great work in that area, especially in the basics, and I would encourage you to check that out. He's especially good on the privacy side and helping you manage your digital persona and things like that. So from our perspective, at the end of the day, there's 5 principles that we have that we focus on for open source. And being redundant there, the biggest and first and foremost is focus itself. If you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there. And the same data science question we ask is, what exactly is the problem that we want to solve? So before you start any open source exploration or any kind of open source deep dive, the first thing you ask yourself is where you want to go and what problem you want to solve. Particularly from the next one, compliance, mentioned that. Make sure that you are managing your risk and understanding and complying with any laws, statutes, and so on and so forth. Efficiency, being as straightforward as possible, having a system in place. Any system will do, as long as you pick where you want to go and have that focus and have some kind of system. I'll point to a couple, but it doesn't really matter what exactly you want to do, as long as you have a system in place and you follow it repeatedly, and then you can iterate through and correct that as you go. Source evaluation is incredibly important in terms of making sure you know who your source is, what their biases are, who their paymaster is, and so on. And then accessibility, making sure you can repeat that and get everyone back to it. And then, yeah, I'll foot stomp one last time, and obviously giving credit to Lewis Carroll and the Cheshire Cat there. If you don't know where you're going, then any road will get you there. So especially in the OSINT world, when you have vast terabytes and petabytes of information to browse through, you can get lost in that the endless bits and bytes of information if you don't know and have an idea of what it is that you want to see. So obviously the abilities and the skills in OSINT apply well outside of just information security, but we've heard a couple different talks on red versus blue, and the OSINT is really beneficial to both. Red, it's fairly straightforward. If you're red teaming, looking at how to break in, how to play the bad guy, then using your open source intelligence lets you get some ideas of what your target looks like, what's important to your target. You can get an idea for what usernames look like, email addresses, things like that. One difference that I would want to highlight from the definition we use, there's sort of a gray area on red teaming when you're doing pen testing, when you're doing web app pen testing, where you go from open source intelligence to reconnaissance. And depending on the red team, depending on the organization, the open source intelligence is looking at press releases, is looking at widely available information, versus once you start poking around on the target's website, especially if you start digging around into the different databases, poking and prodding, that becomes reconnaissance. And the general differentiator, I would say, being you can start showing up on the SOC team's radar depending on what you're doing. So open source intelligence is considered, it should be considered for the red team, low risk, where you are just gathering information without any real risk of discovery. On the blue side, at the blue team, there's the big thing you can do in terms of looking for indicators of compromise is understanding your email addresses and keeping an eye out for email addresses that have been involved in any number of breaches that happen day to day and week to week. And I'll point at that. There's a couple different good websites that you can check out as the blue team and keep an eye on, and personally to plug your own email addresses in and see what breaches you've been involved in and understand when it's time to change your password. Because of course, we're all, as information security folks, not reusing passwords from website to website, and definitely updating our passwords every 60 to 90 days or not. So I of course wouldn't dream of talking about anything like this without giving you at least a few tools and fun different operators in Google to take away. I do of course have to give a word of caution, and there's lots of stuff that we can't get into on the OSINT side, lots of different ways. Me personally, if I'm diving down into open source research, then I'm probably on a completely separate computer that no one else in my family is going to take. We didn't even get into the deep and dark web, and the dark web in particular, in terms of seeing things that you don't necessarily want their wives and kids and things like that to see. So as always, do your own risk analysis. Make sure you understand what you're getting into before you dive down into different areas. As it says in any number of different folks smarter than me and in Proverbs and things like that, when you go looking for trouble, you are going to find it, especially on the web. If you go looking for weird, wild stuff, then it is absolutely going to find you. So make sure you balance that with what your risk appetite is. The first thing, as any open source professional would tell you, that the first thing you can do, most of us, especially if we're using Chrome, get stuck with Google as our homepage. The first thing you can do is switch that general Google page from the Google search to Google Advanced. And that essentially handholds you through any number of different possibilities. And you don't have to learn anything else other than bringing this up, and it walks you through punching in your search terms, and then it asks you about, you see their exact phrases, excluding words, particular languages, things like that. So it absolutely makes it easy as can be to dial your search in, exclude things, bound your time, things like that. So that's the very first thing you can do is if you have a search engine, whatever your search engine of preference is, then change that to your advanced. There it goes. And then another one, Agent Alford used this to great benefit, and would highlight is the bounding of time. There's, you see there, anytime you can do past hour, past 24 hours, and I would draw your attention to the very bottom of that at custom range. And that actually is one of the big tools that Agent Alford used to catch the Dread Pirate Roberts. In that custom range, you can push back the time, and that's one of the most powerful tools, frankly, in my opinion, to get out of the recent news cycles in our constant 24-hour news cycle. If you push that back, if you push that custom range back to days, weeks, months ago, it will radically change your results. And think about the difference if you were to start searching on coronavirus and COVID-19. If you push the search back 2 or 3 months to see exactly what people were saying, what things look like from there, and it works for anything. In the case of Dread Pirate Roberts, Agent Alford dialed in on particular times and looked at particular windows for those different message boards that he was looking at. For the next operator, I'll highlight an example that I tried out down the road from me in Suffolk. In this case, Amazon was buying up property in Suffolk. It made the news briefly. There wasn't a ton of information. In this case, here we go. I went onto the state or the city of Suffolk, Virginia webpage and punched in there Amazon to try to learn more about this purchase. And there it comes. And got absolutely no results found. So we back out to, in this case, Google, but yeah, kicking back to there's different options. In this case, we use the site operator, which is a nice one. In this case, so we punch in site and the same website we were just at, suffolkva.us, and Amazon there. There we go, and punch it in. And while we got no results on the web page itself, we do get 2 results that take us to, in this case, the City of Suffolk's real estate assessments, and lots of different document numbers, lots of different potential keyword searches explaining what was bought, how much was bought, exactly where it is, so on and so forth, and you can take it from there. So when Google and all the different search engines do their indexing, of course, it's a little bit different from the search engines that the particular sites might use within. And at the same time, there's also a security takeaway from that, where until you start clicking on the website directly and refer back to the HTTP refer and what the webmasters can see, there's a certain amount of standoff that you get being able to browse through and see what is where before you step onto the website. Then the final one I would give you, a question that we get asked a lot, and I get asked a lot, is, I don't have anything in mind. I just want to find something fun. And to that end, I give you InTitle. And InTitle looks particularly at the title of the web page, and there's a couple different things you can do with InTitle, but in this case, we'll talk InTitle index of. And when you do InTitle with index of in quotes, you are essentially finding open directories. For this case, tried to keep it tame. I'm a hobbyist woodworker, so I'll type in something I like, woodworking, in title, index of, and this drops you into, this gives you a laundry list of different websites that have open directories that, in this case, tied to woodworking. Again, pick your topic, pick your area of interest, and here it comes. What those open directories give you is, generally speaking, more interesting information than maybe what was just dropped on the public-facing websites. It can be either things that the company or organization's webmaster didn't necessarily want to make available, or it can be hobbyists, in these cases, hobbyists who just simply compile a good deal of information and have made it publicly accessible to the world. Again, not making any comments about copyright or what should and shouldn't, isn't for public consumption. But when you're browsing around, I always start with that. And there it comes. At the end of the day, well, as an Osen analyst, you have to dig. It's nice to be able to plug in there, but you have to get off of page one of Bing, Yandex, Baidu, Google, whatever you prefer. I think that the story is that Agent Alford was on something like page 20 or 25. Maybe that's a little bit extreme, but certainly you have to dig around and be willing to go off of page one and dive down into page 2, 3, and beyond. So we have an expression in the Army: if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, riddle them with bullets. I think the more general expression is if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, bury them in bullshit. So I will happily refer you to any number of awesome organizations that I use on a pretty regular basis. And for illustration purposes, I will get you there using the same tools and techniques that we talked about. Intel Techniques and Mike Basil is an awesome resource. Used to offer a lot of courses. Unfortunately, it doesn't do the open courses anymore, but still puts out great books on the subject. So if you were to try some of the techniques, the site, and in this case, we illustrated file type here. If you were to punch in tools, file type, which lets you pick, you can pick PDFs, docs, PPTs, and so on. File type PDF, and his site, inteltechniques.com, which I encourage you to check out. This gets you to his OSINT cheat sheet at inteltechniques.com that breaks down a lot of what we just talked about, gives you a lot of different ideas and a lot of different frameworks to start with. Another good one is Osen Framework. Punch that into your preferred search engine, and Osen Framework will jump right to the top of it. And I mentioned earlier that we'll talk about different potential breach data. So if you follow to the top right there, Osen Framework, following email addresses and breach data to your top right, it will link you into a couple great search engines. The top one, Have I Been Pwned and Dehashed, are my two favorites. You can punch in either your personal email addresses, your organizational email addresses, to see what breaches they got tied up in, when they happened. It doesn't necessarily expose any PII, but what it does let you know is exactly when that was revealed and when it's time to change your passwords. And again, that's just the beginning. There's a treasure trove of information and different ideas on where to start, where to go, and so on. There we go. So another one of my my favorites, iIntelligence, great organization that I mentioned, puts on a variety of different classes. In this case, if you punch into your preferred search engine, -intelligence, and the same thing, we'll use file type PDF. This gets you into, if you just love being inundated in information, then they have their open source intelligence tools and resources handbook. that comes in at about 326, I think, if memory serves, pages of information, and nothing but links, one link after another, broken down by areas, all the areas we talked about earlier, the maps, the archives, things like that. This will get you off and running. It's a couple years old now, 2018, so some of those links are going to be dead. But if you want to go nuts, digging around into the deep web versus just the dark web, then you can't do any better than iIntelligence and their handbook. I would also be remiss. Oh, is it coming up? There we go. I would be remiss. My hats off to Osen Curious. Is a great website. They put on a podcast, and Michael Hoffman, who teaches a number of different Osen courses, puts out great stuff. But if you want to get more into it, hear more from a variety of Osen professionals, then I point you to Osen Curious. Check out their webcast. They have a ton of different free courses that you can check out and get you started. If you prefer to get your hands-on as quick as you can and need a little bit of focus, then Trace Labs is, frankly, where it's at. They put on regular CTFs. We had our CTF today, digging down on the red side. Trace Labs does their CTFs for missing persons, trying to do, as they put it, hashtag OSINT for good, where they have a variety of different missing person cases to tackle. They do both the CTFs and they have regular ongoing missions. It's a great mission, great organization that I encourage you to check out. And with that said, just a little, 4 or 5 minutes ahead of schedule. But pending your questions, I remind you that, in the words of the great Darth Vader philanthropist, strong people don't put others down; they lift them up. So, Kellen, how are we doing on time and questions?
We are doing great, and we have some really cool questions that have come in. I really enjoyed that talk. I think OSINT is fascinating, and even if you're not looking up data about people, a lot of these skills will make you good at IT.
Oh, absolutely, and I didn't put stuff that nearly as well as I should. This is absolutely a cross-cutting skill that can make you great at anything, and improve your ability to go find outside of just stalking your neighbors. Right. Being able to find and vet information and sources and understand where it comes from and understand what it means, it's great stuff.
Yeah, Google foo, as I call it, and many others before me.
Yeah, the Google foo is a solid piece of it, and that's what I was touching on. But Google foo is just the beginning.
Exactly. So we have some questions that came in during the talk. So somebody wanted to know what the resource you gave on the privacy and hygiene slide was.
Sure, I'll drop that in. I'll drop it in the slides. Navigators.com. Russ Hainall does great stuff and is a tremendous resource that he puts a lot of great information out there. But yeah, navigatorsplural.com, and I'll drop the slides in as well.
Awesome. So somebody wanted to, they weren't familiar with it, but you referenced the Great Facebook Apocalypse. What did you mean by that?
Sure. So they've done it a couple of times because they're private organizations and they can do what they want. And I'm not going to say anything too bad because I don't want to piss off Mark Zuckerberg and bring his vast resources down upon me. But they tightened up what you could and couldn't see in the different Facebook graphs. If you dig down, that's Facebook and social media. Like I said, in and of itself is a 3 or 4 day course, but they tightened up what you could and couldn't see in terms of the Facebook charts and being able to follow people and see what they were doing and how. And the bigger issue was they did it without any prior coordination or warning. And so that frustrated a lot of the OSINT analysts, a lot of folks who were trying to track down criminals and pedophiles and pretty nasty folks. And again, without any coordination, that kind of threw them off the rails pretty quickly. Yeah, if using what we just talked about, if you just plug in the Facebook apocalypse, you can dive down into a lot of detail. But that was the gist of it. Was they completely changed how you could search and what you could search on Facebook literally overnight.
Awesome. So this is a specific question, but I think it's really interesting. So somebody was asking, is there a need, what are the current needs and boots on the ground approaches for OSINT on medical misinformation from state actors? And who is deploying those strategies? Do you have any information on that you can share?
So, yeah, being a governmental guy, I'm afraid I have to deflect a lot of that.
Okay.
I can say that is, I mean, that's a whole, disinformation is a whole issue unto itself. And vetting sources and understanding that within social media, understanding bots and what their intent is, that is a whole subcategory of OSINT unto itself. So I could say I would expect that. Yes, there are probably if we're talking about COVID disinformation in the US, yes, there are people looking at that, but that topic in general of disinformation is a challenge within OSINT. And yeah, I would kick you back to that source validation, understanding what it is you're looking at, what their biases are, and so on. But yeah, understanding your sources is important, and not just for medical, but for whatever your topic is.
Yeah, definitely. So in your experience, have you seen companies or organizations that employ people who strictly have an OSINT job?
Sure, it depends. Again, being a government guy, yeah, we have tons of OSINT. So sure, yes, absolutely. It depends on the size of the organization. A lot of the bigger ones, I can't remember any specific ones, but banks, any of the big organizations that have a public persona to protect, in a lot of cases will employ OSINT specialists who are constantly looking at both what they are putting out and what they're broadcasting, and at the same time what's being said about them. It's important not just for governments, but certainly for multinational corporations. You're going to see it more in the big ones. You're going to get dual hatted in the medium and small size, but big organizations, especially financial institutions, things like that, are always looking at what exactly it is they're putting out.
Sweet. Let me see if I have any more questions sitting in the chat or the Discord. There's some really lively conversation going on about OSINT and finding information. Some people talking about the Trace Labs CTF that happens and participating in that.
Yeah,
Do you have any
I would
experience
love
with
to.
that?
I did the last one, so they just had one. I've lost all track of time since we can't leave our house, but
Right?
I want to say it was about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, so it's about monthly that they do their CTFs. Again, I can't say enough awesome stuff about that organization. Please check them out. Please join. They do their big talks in Slack. But yeah, for this last one, it was about 15 to 20 different missing persons cases that they put out there. And they also have an ongoing mission where weekly to bi-weekly, they'll have different folks that they try to track down. But it's a chance for you to really flex and use some of those OSINT skills for good. That's one of the challenges with OSINT. That, I mean, even though I talked it up at the beginning about how great, it's awesome, you can go out there and you can try it whenever you want, but in a lot of cases you're sort of aimless, and then, like I said, you get lost in those vast chasms of information. But they really help you dial that in, and dial it in a really productive and meaningful way, where they give you the missing person case, and you kind of dig around and see what you can find about that, and then that information is passed along to the authorities on who are working that particular case.
Awesome. Yeah. Let me. I guess I'll ask a question. I didn't see it in chat, but it's one that I think is kind of interesting. Like,
Mhm.
how did you get started in OSINT, and what kind of led you to doing this?
So some of it a combination of curiosity and dumb luck, I guess you could say. In my case, working on and for NATO and in their OSINT portfolio, I stumbled upon it. Being a Intel guy for the last 10 to 15 years, and before that IT, you're always kind of digging in and looking for more information. The key skill, I think, and I like, and again, a nod to Michael Hoffman and those folks, is curiosity. and being willing to really dive down and dig into the web pages to get past that. And like I said, we could barely touch on that when we get into looking behind the curtain when it comes to different web pages. So as an Intel guy, I've been using the different techniques and skills for 10 years or so now in that realm, and then before that in IT, being willing to essentially roll up your sleeves and get after it.